conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Good morning, everybody. Well, I've come here straight from Heathrow Airport. Yes, I've been over in Washington, D.C. for a few days, attending an event organised by the American Conservative Union, and every year they have a Conservative Political Action Conference. They describe themselves as the birthplace of modern conservatism. They're combining ideas with action to leverage the strength of thousands of grassroots activists to break through the resistance of Washington's powerful elites. So these are conservative voices from all over America, and quite a few from Europe now too, that attend this annual jamboree. It's attended by, I guess there were 10,000 people there, delegates at the conference. I would also guess 6,000-7,000 of them would have been under the age of 25. So a lot of very young student activists, people who'd caught buses from all over America to be there. Not officially anything to do with the Republican Party at all. In fact, many of these activists view the Republican Party as being the problem, not the solution. And not since Ronald Reagan has an American president, Republican president, attended CPAC. It's been going for nearly 50 years. But Donald Trump turned up and spoke at CPAC last year, and he was back speaking at CPAC this year. Why? Well, the Americans have got big midterm elections coming up in November this year, and Trump thinks one of the big keys to succeeding in elections is grassroots activism. Shoe leather, people out there knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, getting out the vote on polling day, joining phone banks, and all the rest of it. I was fortunate to get to spend some time with the president. In fact, I met him immediately after he'd come off stage. He was buzzing. He's had a good couple of months, and the polls are looking a lot better for him. So it was good to catch up with the president. I hadn't seen him for a bit. I never ever disclose any confidential conversations I have with him. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that he is interested in UK politics, interested in where Brexit is going. And indeed, I didn't just meet him. I mean, I also met Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, Betsy DeVos, the Education Secretary, and a lot of those people in the West Wing who kind of helped the president run America. So it's been a very interesting few days. But I wonder, given that I am in the fortunate position of having all these contacts and connections, and actually genuine friends who are part of the Trump administration, and given that with Brexit we're looking to broaden out across the world in terms of what we do, and one of the big things would be a trade deal with the USA, do you think that given those links and connections, the government should make some use of me in the run-up to these, and perhaps even during these trade talks? And if you think, no, I think Nigel Farage is the worst person possible to do anything on behalf of the country, a view I think that is taken very much at the moment by this government, and I'll tell you shortly about a really quite remarkable boycott by the British Embassy of an event I attended. If you think I'm the worst person possible, I should have nothing to do with it, then call 0345 6060 973, or maybe you think it might be helpful for me to be able in some way to broker a deal and to improve relationships, by the way, that need to be improved, because I feel, despite Brexit, a Conservative Prime Minister, Trump winning, and all the talk about what our countries would do together, I think the Atlantic is still as wide as it was back in 2016, when many thought it might get just a little bit narrower. So if you think maybe I could help in some way, text to 84850, or maybe you've got a bigger, better idea. Maybe actually you think that we don't want a trade deal with the USA, that actually we might be better off staying in a customs union with the EU, which would mean we couldn't negotiate one anyway, and therefore I wouldn't be needed. And if that's how you feel, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can of course watch us on Facebook and comment there too. I'm going to go to Jason from Watford. Hello, Jason.
Good morning, how are you?
Good morning. I'm okay, actually.
He's jet lagged.
Do you know, people talk about jet lag. Honest truth is, Jason, you know, some nights I go to bed at 7 o'clock and some nights I go to bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, so it doesn't really make very much difference to me. No, I mean, it was a very busy few days over there, but a very interesting few days over there. I mean, one thing I can tell you, Jason, is the energy, the excitement, the enthusiasm that the Conservative supporting Americans have is something that just doesn't seem to exist in this country, really.
Yeah, but that's the American culture, isn't it? They get very enthusiastic, excited about a lot of things that we don't get excited about in this country.
I think that's true, although you could argue, Jason, that within Momentum and within a bit of the Labour Party, there's been a bit of enthusiasm generated there.
Possibly, but not like you get in America. You know what it's like there. You just come back from that place.
Yeah.
The reason I'm obviously speaking to you today is because one of the concerns I'd have about you being let's say, negotiator is that you're clearly a huge Donald Trump fan, and you can't really see any wrong. Whatever he does, you either see it as funny or the right thing to do. And you don't seem to be a Theresa May fan. So would you be the best person to negotiate? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, Jason, let's deal with that. I mean, I am a supporter of President Trump. I do think he's taking the states in the right direction, and I do think, in a way, you know, he is the leader of this sort of revolution that is taking place across the West, where we're getting back to the concept of nation states being the building block that we believe in. And I am critical of Theresa May, but ultimately, Jason, much as I love America, and my first job for an American company was way back in 1982, and I've spent a lot of time there over the last 30 years. But ultimately, you know, I am British first, so it's Britain. You know, Britain's interests must be put first. But I do think, Jason, when it comes to trade, business, commerce, when it comes to security and dealing with international threats, when it comes to the military alliance of NATO, I do think us having a good relationship with America for the mutual benefit of both is what matters.
Right. My father thinks you're wonderful. He absolutely thinks you're great, and he'd love to see you run in this country. And I'm kind of just a bit unsure about sometimes your motives, because if I was in your position, I would, and I loved England, and I had the power that you've got. My first goal would be to try and become president of this country. Because you love the country.
Well, we haven't got. Well, Jason, we haven't got presidents here, have we? We've got
Prime Minister. Sorry,
yeah, what we've got, Minister. Jason. What we've got here, I'm afraid, is a predominantly two-party system that prevails. Yeah. That prevails under first past the post. And I've not found myself through my adult life, or most of it, able to align with either of them. So that's rather difficult.
Well, yeah, but if Jeremy Corbyn could be doing as well as he's doing, I think you could easily become a lot more successful. But going back to the
that's by the by, Jason. I mean, the real point, Jason, is this, right? Just over a year ago, Trump tweeted, many people think that Nigel Farage would be good as the next British ambassador in Washington, right? He was saying, you know, this is somebody we can work with, someone we know, someone we trust. Now, I'll be frank with you, Jason. I'm not actually asking to become the ambassador. I'm not actually asking for an official position. I'm not asking for a title or a job. I'm not asking for any money. I'm not asking for anything. All I'm saying, Jason, is that I think I could perhaps be useful in getting relations between our country and America back to where it needs to be. And I tell you what I find amazing is 72 hours after he was elected, you know, I went and met him in his apartment up at the top of the Trump Tower. And nobody from the UK government or the Foreign Office even rang me and asked for a debrief. And it's as if their dislike of me, Jason, their intense dislike of me, matters more in some ways than doing the right thing.
But what bothers me is that Theresa May and Donald Trump on the surface, because you've got to remember, people like myself, I've met Donald Trump, so I know the type of character of the person you're talking about. And it was a long time ago that I met the man. And it didn't surprise me one iota that he became the president of the United States of America, because he's got that determination and there's something about the man. But what bothers me is it's not the government isn't your problem. It's the British public that can't stand Donald Trump, generally. It's when you talk to people on the street, they can't stand him. I was out with people last night, they don't like it, but Theresa May doesn't seem to have an issue with it.
But you know what, Jason? Whether we like Donald Trump or not doesn't seem to me to be the issue. The issue is that, is it in our national interest, firstly, to have a better relationship with him, secondly, to welcome him here on a visit, as much of the rest of the world wants to do? Surely that's what matters here, isn't it?
Absolutely, but do you not think things like the royal wedding and him getting an invite to that would do far more to the relationship than what you could possibly do in negotiating better trade deals?
I think, look, the royal wedding is, yes, you're quite right, a coming together of us and North America, but no, I think more needs to be done. Nigel, if the government asked for your assistance with Brexit, it's an admittance they have no idea what on earth they're doing, and Whitehall functionaries are Euro fanatics and think us two short planks. Helpfully, says Richard on this Sunday morning. Hi, Nigel. You should be negotiating with Jacob Rees-Mogg, says Pauline. Well, that's a comment on UK politics, not on any potential relationship with the USA. Nigel Farage would be useless in assisting the UK in trade talks with the US. How can we guarantee he will stay 100% committed and won't resign within 6 months? Nigel needs to realise that these talks are serious. Isn't that interesting? 25 years. 25 years of my life campaigning for this little outfit called UKIP, and someone suggests that I might be a quitter. You got the wrong end of the stick, mate. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 10:15. So I'm back from DC, where I was very pleased to catch up with President Trump once again and to meet some pretty senior people in the US administration. Betsy DeVos, Education; Wilbur Ross, Commerce. And it's interesting. I'm just saying, as I've said before, that I have got some good relationships with people in the US administration, and indeed some friends there that I've known for some years. And maybe, just maybe, given the difficulties that there have been between Downing Street, the British government and the US administration, just maybe I might be able to be helpful in some way. Tony says to me by text, nobody has the contacts you have in America. Oh dear, I get on Twitter. Is Farage really trying to pitch for a government job? No, I'm not. I don't want a job. I don't want a government job. I don't want to be paid. I don't want a title. I don't want a business card. I'm not going to become the ambassador in Washington, although I do wonder about the current ambassador in Washington. Let me tell you why. Let me give you an example, all right, of how this government's dislike of me is not acting in our national interest. So, in DC, on Thursday evening, there was an inaugural event, a rather surprising event, you might think in many ways. Yes, the Royal Commonwealth Society, patron the Queen, held its first ever event in the United States of America. The thing was hosted by Governor Phil Bryant of Mississippi, and he is in fact setting up a Royal Commonwealth Society office in Jackson, Mississippi. And in attendance were Lord Howe, former Conservative Cabinet Minister. He's the president of the Royal Commonwealth Society, and its director, Mike Lake. So they flew over from London to be at this event. An event, as I say, that was, I think, significantly attended by Wilbur Ross, the US Commerce Secretary. And amazing, isn't it? We had the governor of Mississippi there, the governor of Oklahoma there, some very senior people, some business figures from Washington, D.C. there as well. So why was the Royal Commonwealth Society setting up in the USA? Well, there is something out there called the English-speaking peoples of the world. And there are 52 countries now within the Commonwealth. They represent a population of about 2.3 billion. They have within them, of course, some of the biggest, fastest growing economies in the world. And this is an attempt to draw America into that orbit. Doesn't mean that America is going to join the Commonwealth necessarily at all. But what it does mean is there's a chance here for people to come together and to talk trade and to talk cultural links, amongst a group of countries who speak English, have common law, and together have pretty remarkable shared history. So the event was held, and it was an overwhelming success, with one exception. Formal invitation was, of course, sent to the British ambassador in Washington, Sir Kim Darroch. He replied that he couldn't come because he would be out of town. Well, okay. But tell you a funny thing, nobody else came from the embassy at all. They must all have been out of town. Perhaps we've closed down the British embassy in Washington. I don't know. No, of course, the truth is they boycotted the event because I had something to do with it. And I think there's a clear example there of us not putting the national interest first. And I can tell you that some of those senior American politicians were pretty disgusted that at this inaugural event, that our Foreign Office, our embassy in Washington, effectively boycotted it. And I wonder, I didn't ask them, but I wonder what Lord Howe and Mike Lake made of it as well, having come all the way over, to represent the Royal Commonwealth Society. It is small-minded, it is petty, it is tribal politics at its very worst. And whether they dislike me intensely, and of course they absolutely hate me because they never wanted to have a referendum in the first place, and they think I've really upset the apple cart. But whatever they think of me, there is something here that clearly was in our national interest, and they took no part of it. So that's where we are. That's the state of the British government's attitude towards me. And I would have thought perhaps they might be big enough and ugly enough to put that behind them and to get on with something more positive. That's what I think, but tell me what you think. What does Jason in Sutton think? Good morning, Jason.
Good morning to you, Nigel. Let's put it to the test. You say you'd like to be involved in our trade negotiations with the States. You were just talking about the Commonwealth. Do you know how much of our total exports America already takes from us?
About 20%.
Yeah, it's about 24%. Yeah, it's nearly a quarter of everything we sell already goes to the States.
I know. And isn't that remarkable, Jason, given the barriers that exist, and given particularly, Jason, that the US economy is off to the races in terms of growth and everything else, growth and investment and everything else. Look, Jason, you've just made the point in a way that everybody can exist on World Trade Organization rules, and they can. And
let me jump in, if I may.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in there? Over the last 20 years or so, there are dozens upon dozens upon dozens of EU-USA agreements in place. Everything from X-raying containers, security, research, development, making customs easier. We lose all of those benefits after we leave the EU, first of all.
Why?
Because they're EU-USA agreements. We would have to start them again, or we'd have to grandfather them across. Now, that's not been agreed. We don't have US permission for that. In fact, Wilbur Ross, actually, what he said was Brexit is what he called a God-given opportunity to countries around the world to pick off the best bits of the UK economy. Nice guy. You talk about the Commonwealth a lot. When we export vehicles, I
think you're somewhat misquoting Wilbur Ross there, Jason, aren't you? He talked about talked about a trade deal being an opportunity for American investors, as indeed it is an opportunity for UK. I mean, already the Americans are the biggest investor in Britain, right? And we are the biggest overseas investor in America. Are there technical arrangements in place between the EU and the USA? Yes. Could we automatically pick up those rights the next day if we chose to? Yes. But what I'm arguing is actually we could make the relationship even better by removing more barriers. Now, are you saying, Jason, that you do not think that we should be aiming for an FTA, free trade agreement, with the USA?
Well, the USA is only one part of the world. As you say, 55% of our exports go all over the world. Our cars, for example, that we sell around the world, the average export price is £20,600.
Yeah, we sell...
Do you know what the average GDP per person is within the Commonwealth? $3,500. And if you take out Canada, you take out Australia, it's even less than that. So these people have got $3,500 a year.
All right. So, Jason, do you think...
How many of our £20,000 cars do you think they're going to buy?
So do you think, Jason, that India is actually a country in decline?
No, of course it's not. It's a growing.
Right. So the point is the number of rich people, Jason, in India who are able to buy a £20,000 car goes up every year by quite a huge number. And you're quite right about UK car exports. You know, we now sell more of our cars to the non-EU world than we do to the EU world. The question I'm asking you, and that is relevant to this debate, is do you think we should be aiming at a free trade agreement with America? Not in exclusion to the rest of the world, but should we be aiming at it?
You just mentioned
Should
India.
we be aiming at a free trade agreement with America?
When we visited Prime Minister Modi in India, Theresa May went over.
Should we be I'm going to try one more time, Jason. Should we be aiming at a free trade agreement with the USA?
On the basis that it's a fair and equal and balanced trade agreement, yes, that's not what we'd get. And especially...
Well, hang on, Jason. If we didn't get it, we wouldn't sign up to it, would we?
Well, then what's the point? We've already got an excellent trading relationship.
All right. Okay. Then actually, we should leave the European Union tomorrow, do it on WTO rules, because you're perfectly happy with us operating with the USA on WTO rules, albeit with a few bits of technical adjustment to make trade simpler.
That's not how we trade with the US at the moment, and you know that very well.
Jason, we trade with America on WTO rules, and yes, of course, there are technical agreements with ports and everything else, but we trade on WTO rules. Jason, I thank you. Did my best. Matthew at Heathrow is the next caller. Matthew, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. Basically, I'm around Remainer, accepted we're going to be leaving, but basically, I think now is a good opportunity. The timing's right for you to get involved to try to get a free trade deal with the USA, but at the same time you've got to get the EU involved as well. We're not going to get that free trade deal unless the EU is part of it, and we can have a tailor-made customs arrangement, what Labour's talking about.
It's not impossible. It's not impossible that the European Union would look to have a free trade deal with the USA, although I do detect, to be honest with you, Matthew, that anti-American sentiment in Brussels is really, really high, and particularly with, a right-of-centre Trump regime. So I don't think, to be honest with you, that a close USA trade deal with the EU is on the cards anytime soon.
Well, but you could use that to try to get a good deal for the UK.
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. No. I mean, it seems to me, Matthew, that the closer we are in talks and relationships with America, actually the more leverage we've got in our negotiations with the European Union, all of which leaves me bewildered, that 13 months into a Trump presidency, we don't appear to have made any advances at all on this score. I think we're missing a trick, Matthew.
Yeah, I know. And so why don't you now write a confidential letter to Theresa May highlighting the bits of information you found from Donald Trump and saying that you want to work together with them to try to get the right deal for the UK with the EU, but also to start talking about how this trade could work with the US and with the UK. So, I mean, have you actually written a letter to her? Obviously, it's got to be confidential. You can't put it on the website. I mean...
that wouldn't really work, would it? Matthew, I've been saying now, for well over a year, that if I could be of any use to help in any way at all, I would like to. Nobody has ever contacted me. They haven't even asked for a debrief, and I doubt they will after this trip. They even boycotted, the inaugural event of the Royal Commonwealth Society. Amazing. Thank you. Helena says, Nigel Farage might have US contacts, but he's too old to learn to be diplomatic. A necessity to be a diplomat. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage. She's probably right. The Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It's time for the news. It's 10:30. Could I be of use to the British government in our upcoming trade talks with the USA, or in any other way to be a bit of a broker in between the two administrations who at the moment appear to be moving further apart rather than closer? But before I get back to that and your very strong opinions of whether I'm any use at all, I have to talk about the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who during the referendum campaign made it absolutely clear why he supported Remain. He goes on doing so. He said some pretty disobliging things about me, all of which led, about a week before the referendum, quite early one morning, we were going over Lambeth Bridge on the open-top double-decker that I was going around the country in, and I was just getting the microphone ready to sort of give, commuters a blast as they were coming out of Waterloo train station, and who was walking over the bridge but Archbishop Welby? And I have to say, I got the microphone and did give him both barrels. Gosh, I enjoyed that. But today, in the Mail on Sunday, big full-page piece from the Archbishop of Canterbury, Brexit and a broken Britain. And he says things like, the ugly disparity between the mansions that some can afford and the poor housing that others must inhabit shows how badly our society has corroded. Really, Archbishop? Do you think in Victorian London and Manchester that there weren't huge wealth disparities? Are you actually saying that the gap between living conditions at the top and the bottom have got worse since Brexit? I don't think so. It's a deeply misguided comment. He also says, austerity is crushing the weak, the sick and many others. Archbishop, we are still having to borrow 50 billion sterling every single year. This government is not cutting. We are still going on borrowing. And I have to say, the whole tone of the piece, where he talks about division and yet through the words he uses further increases division, this is a very negative article from the Archbishop yet again. And I just want to say this, Archbishop, stop talking the country down, because that's what you're doing. What a contrast this is to the people now running the administration in America, where they constantly talk up their country, their people and their prospects. You get back off the aeroplane into the UK to this dire negativity and a cold easterly wind and snow on the way. Now, back to this question of am I any use to anybody, particularly in brokering something, trade, whether it's leading up to a trade deal or whatever else it may be with the Americans. Sorry to break the news, but you are the worst person to do with any talks about Brexit. Well, I wasn't talking about Brexit necessarily. You lied to us since the start, and look where we are. Oh, thanks for that. That's very helpful. Hilarious, Nigel. You've just added a new dimension to the phrase blowing your own trumpet. With Nigel's dual knowledge of both business and politics on both sides of the pond, it is only logical that he's leading the talks. I didn't necessarily, Chris, ask to lead the talks, but thank you for your comment. Nigel, you should be made Britain's roving world ambassador for trade and industry immediately. You, like Trump, have had a history in business, and unlike most MPs, you actually work for a living. Trouble is, our Oxbridge elite know what's best, think they know what's best for the 17 million uneducated, working-class idiots who voted Brexit. Thank you, Alan from Basildon. And Nicola says on Twitter, it would be common sense with your contacts, Nigel, so you can be sure they'll do the exact opposite. Nicola, I suspect you're right. And it would it not be logical? Let's have a little think about this. If I've been chatting to Wilbur Ross and Donald Trump and various people, would it not be logical for somebody in the UK government to say, look, quietly, off the record, don't tell anybody, because, by the way, Helena, I can be very diplomatic. I haven't told you a word of my conversation with Donald Trump, and nor will I, ever. But it would actually be quite logical from somebody from the UK government to say, look, just pop in, would you? Have a cup of coffee. Just tell us what the mood is over there. But I tell you what, it won't happen. Their dislike of me is much greater, it seems, than the need to do what I think would be the right thing. Chris is calling from Islington. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Nigel. Well, you and your best mate, you don't get on very well with him, because the 200% tariff he put on a British company, Bombardier,
yep,
you had no say in that. You could do nothing about that. The threat to General Motors if they moved a plant to Mexico, that he would put punitive taxes on them, he's a protectionist. Donald Trump is a protectionist. What did you do about Bombardier, Nigel?
Well, Chris, you've just made the point, Chris. Thank you. You've just illustrated beautifully why having a trade deal with the USA would be the right thing to do, because then that tariff would not have... It's come off now, but that tariff would not have been put on. So there is an argument here that says that would be a good thing. The broader point about him being a protectionist is it's very interesting, Chris. His argument is that free trade needs to be fair as well. And he does see the relationship with Mexico as one whereby America is being undercut and jobs are being exported. But, Chris, what I can tell you, and I've known this since November 16, since the week that they actually won the election, is they're very keen to do a free trade deal with the UK, because that shows everybody that far from being a protectionist, he's actually pro-free trade if it's with countries that he sees to be of equivalence. And perhaps, Chris, the real thing here, of course, is that now that Article 50 when it expires on March the 29th is not the end of the process, because the government is going for a transition deal that will last goodness knows how long. Now, Chris, I think the reality that's dawning on the Trump administration, and they are somewhat bewildered by it, is that realistically there's going to be no trade deal signed until the end of Trump's first term as president.
You say that, Nick, but America's biggest trading partner is Canada. He wants to rewrite NAFTA with Canada as well. They're not a poor country. They're not like... look, the East Europeans that come here undercut British workers. That was a fact of life when they first came. That was a fact of life. You can't stop people moving. America needs the Mexicans. They can't survive. Their economy cannot survive without them. I've lived in America. You've lived in America. You know that. If he wasn't a protectionist, why would he want to rewrite the NAFTA agreement with Canada, their biggest trading partner? They're not undercutting them in wages.
Chris, I have a feeling, I could be wrong, but I have a feeling that the rewriting of NAFTA is now a very much lower priority than many other things for the Trump administration. And interestingly, you talk about Mexicans or whatever it may be. One of the things Trump said in his speech on Friday that was particularly interesting was the bit on immigration. He said we're going to need quite a lot of immigration into America because there are so many new factories, so many new businesses opening up in America, we haven't got enough people. And indeed, in bits of Washington, Chris, that I was in, there is now genuinely underemployment. Firms are struggling to find enough staff. But what he wanted to do was to change America's immigration to a point-style system. So, Chris, I think there's a change of priorities, but I do take your general point. You know, your general point that Trump to many appears to be a protectionist, that he doesn't like what he sees as unfair trade. I take that point, Chris, but I do think rewriting of NAFTA rules with Canada is now I think, from what I can see of it, a relatively low priority. Thank you. Robbie says, Nigel has worked tirelessly on behalf of the UK and should be at the negotiating table. Andy says, Nigel, you will get the call to negotiate a Britain-USA trade deal when Jacob Rees-Mogg becomes Prime Minister. Well, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Frank says, your speech in the US demonstrates enthusiasm and provides optimism. This optimism is desperately needed now in the UK. And Paul says, you are not in a position to help. You need to be in some sort of political party. Well, I am in a political party. It's called UKIP, which has relevance in the European Parliament, but none at the moment in the UK Parliament. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on RBC. It's now 10:45. The British Embassy in Washington, D.C. boycott a Royal Commonwealth Society event attended by some of the USA's leading politicians. And all of this because I was there. And I'm asking the question, given this government's attitude towards me, wouldn't it actually be useful to do the opposite and maybe use me as a broker, given the contacts and connections I've got within the US administration? Charlotte from the Forest of Dean, I'm going to ask you that question. Could I be of any use at all here, Charlotte?
Yeah, I think you could. And I think what we're seeing here, Nigel, is it's just jealousy, isn't it? At the end of the day, this is just political jealousy, because they know that you're very popular, you're straight talking, and that's why you get on really well with Trump, because Trump doesn't take any of that career politician mealy-mouthed rubbish.
He certainly doesn't.
No, exactly.
Which some people, Charlotte, find brash and offensive, and others love it.
Well, no, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm pretty much a straight talker myself, and I find it refreshing to hear somebody actually sort of getting straight to the point instead of kind of waffling around everything. But at the end of the day, I think that if you compare and contrast the body language, I think you put a picture up earlier of you and the president,
yeah,
and you can contrast that with the body language between May and Trump at Davos.
Oh, I know.
It's absolutely stark. I mean, she looked like she sucked on a lemon. She looked put a rocket under her.
She looked embarrassed to be there. She almost looked sort of shriveled up inside her chair, didn't she?
Yeah, I think he probably gave her a bit of straight talking that she didn't want to hear. And I think that well, no, I mean he
I'm not laughing at what you're saying. I'm laughing with it.
I know, but you know, I mean, I think he basically knows at the end of the day what these politicians are. Your Macrons, your Merkels, your your Theresa May's, your Justin Trudeau's, God forbid, and everything else. And he knows what they are, and they're just, mouthpieces for things that are ruining sort of countries and cultures and everything else. And they don't want people like you there. If Thanet wasn't a wake-up call to people, your attempt to get in at Thanet, then people are absolutely blind because, and he also knows that they hitched their wagons to the wrong horse, didn't they? Because they were all over Barry, they were all over.
Yeah. I mean, we'll find out more, Charlotte.
They shackled it to the wrong horse, and they absolutely hate you. And
they absolutely hate me, and we'll find out more about Thanet in court in May of this year, but I'll leave it at that. Charlotte, I thank you very much indeed. Nigel, we do need a trade deal with America, and you would probably be a great ambassador, given your relationship with Trump. But by the time Brexit goes through, Trump probably, and unfortunately, won't be president, and you won't be an asset to us. Interestingly, one of the things Trump said on the stage at CPAC that he's never said before was, he said, well, we've got 7 more years of this. That's the first time I've heard him say that he does intend to run again in 2020. Nigel, you are the right person to work for trade deals. I think you've been ignored because they won't admit they need you, says Claire. Well, I'm a firm Remainer, I get on Twitter, but I concede we should send Farage to the US. Forever, probably. Indeed, we should deport him and never allow him to return. Oh, this is great. This is democracy in action. This is free speech. This is people having their say. And James is a first-time caller from Nottingham. And James, you're on LBC, and you can have your say.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking the call. You're an absolute legend. So this is actually an honour to speak to you. James,
that last tweet I read out didn't agree with that, but thank you.
No, I know. I feel that you, obviously internationally, you've got great relations with Donald. I just think that with the Tory government, as it says at the moment, yours will be wasted. You can't really put your ideas into place because you'll be representing theirs, and I don't think they kind of match what you want to do.
No, well, all I'm trying to do in this case, James, is just to be helpful, to be a broker, to be a middlman. Yeah. That's all I'm suggesting is that it might actually be in the interest of all of us.
It would be brilliant, with building the relations and everything else. But I just think that, someone like Jacob in power, your ideas matter a lot better, and I think it would work a lot better if that happened.
So if Jacob was in power, it'd all be different, yeah?
Yeah.
Interesting. James, I thank you for your call. Do call again. I thank you. Let's ask Simon in Chiswick what he thinks. Simon, good morning.
Nigel. Look, if I look at your relationship, and I listen to you many times, not because I necessarily agree with you. I think you're a good guy, and I disagree with a lot of what you say. But your relationship with the US to me, is born out of ingratiating yourself. So you're just a yes man. Yes.
Really?
Yes,
do you know, Simon? Yeah. I've never been called. I mean, I've been called obstructive. I've been called abrasive. But I've never been called a yes man.
Now, and this is in particular to Donald Trump. Now, your relationship has been born out of, I've listened to you. You never, ever call him out. And even when you do call him out, the very next day there's a but. But that's not diplomacy, Nigel, right? If you recollect, and I'm no fan of Theresa May, Theresa May was the first person to visit Donald Trump. There was her walking out of the Oval Office, her arm around him. But you know what she dared to do? She dared to challenge him and put the UK's position on certain issues, and that strained the relationship. I don't believe in these tough negotiations that somebody whose relationship, and you're dancing around and doing the victory lap because you've got such high-level meetings, you've had such access, which is born out of...
Simon, hang on. It wasn't a victory lap. It was, I mean, there were two reasons for my visit. One was the invitation to go and speak at CPAC, which of course I accepted. But the other big reason for going was the launch of the Royal Commonwealth Society in the United States of America, a chance to bring America into that orbit, a big organisation, 52 countries, English speaking. I mean, that was a really positive thing that was happening there, and that was recognised by, as I say, Lord Howe going across from London, and by senior American politicians turning up. And the point I'm really making, Simon, whatever your view of me, is that for the British Embassy to boycott that, simply because I was there, is a sign of a government that is not really acting in the national interest.
But Nigel, if you just were in the US, now let me ask you this. Were you derogatory in any way, or did you undermine the Foreign Office or the UK government in your conversation?
No, because
in the US?
No, of course not. Because we invited them to attend this event, and I didn't say anything publicly about this when I was in America. Although some of our American hosts were growling under their breath because they thought it was very, very disrespectful of the British Embassy to behave in this way. So no, I don't go abroad to talk down Britain, Simon. I was very careful about that. And if you look at what I said on the stage, I said, whilst I have my reservations about Brexit, I still hope and believe that it will go through. Simon, could I be of any use in your view?
Look, I mean, again, Nigel, if I'm sitting in the Foreign Office, you've run teams, you've managed process, and in something like this, you need a team that's rowing it all in the same direction. And if there is somebody in there that you feel that is acting for their own personal need over the need of their country, and I don't doubt that you love this country, I do, but I can't, by listening to your rhetoric, it leans towards you. It's the Nigel Farage show, right? And I say that in the nicest possible way.
Well, Simon, I mean, there we are. A very damning final comment from Simon in Chiswick. It's all about me, apparently. There you go. Barry is my last caller on this subject, and he lives in Leigh-on-Sea.
Hello there, Nigel.
Good morning.
Basically, I think because of your links with Business World, what you've done in the trading circles of London and the city, and your last 20 years with UKIP and Brexit and leading the Brexit, and quite frankly, you're the forerunner, you're the spearhead of this whole new world movement of politics. There is no one else who's done this but you. In America, the nationalism which is coming out all over Europe, Britain, America, everywhere. You are the spearhead of the whole lot. And as that side of things, in my mind, you really are and should be involved with a free trade agreement, because you know both politics, you know both the business world. And
well, Barry, you're very kind, Barry. You've got confidence in me to do it. Some have. A lot of people who've called up this morning haven't had. Barry, I thank you. I do get on Twitter, would you be talking on trade agreements for the whole of the UK or just the southeast of England, Nigel? You do seem a little biased towards them. Really, Mark? Really? I don't get that. I think actually I spent most of the last 4 or 5 years as leader of UKIP. I spent most of it in the Midlands or the north of England or South Wales or places like that. Anyway, moving on to our next debate. Recent figures show that 51 new political parties were created last year in this country, and that so far 13 new ones have been set up in 2018. Do we ever hear anything about them? No, not really. But given the aim of this show is to demonstrate that dialogue can and should remain open and civil between different political views, we've invited 2 new political movements into the studio. My question for you, is there room for a new political party in the UK? You can call me on 0345 6060 973. You can text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch us live on Facebook and comment there too.